Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you didn't know, my name is Robin and today I will be going through my biggest disappointments of 2022. So we are backtracking a little bit and I just sort of wanted to discuss these books. These books aren't necessarily bad and some of these books I think I might have enjoyed a little bit as well. It's more that these books didn't meet my expectations, as in they were very hyped up and I had such a high expectation that they didn't really reach, or I just felt disappointed because of everyone talking about it and it just being a bad book. And I don't have many on the list, but I feel like I kind of wanted to talk about it because I didn't last year, so here we go. One of the first ones I'm going to talk about, quite a few of these are going to be controversial, but these are just my opinions, and obviously I said no hate to the author or anything like that. These are just my opinions, and opinions can be wrong sometimes, mine aren't, but apparently they can be. This very first book might cause the most amount of... I have two books on this list that I think are going to get some hate because I've already done a review on one book and I get dislikes on that video quite a bit. First book I want to talk about is Inkheart. I read this book last year and it is a meaty book. It's about 500 pages. Just over 500 pages, and it's a big meaty book. And I think I had to read this when I was a child. Inkheart basically follows, I think the main character is Maggie, who is the daughter of Brendan Fraser. And when Brendan Fraser reads aloud from books, like the characters come to life basically, but also things get put back in the book. The set of goons he's read out of a book called Inkheart have come to life, and they basically want to track Brendan Fraser down and get him to read more stuff to life so that they can take over the world. But Brendan Fraser has to then not only try and read them back into the book, but also his wife is stuck in the book Inkheart, and during all this he wants to try and get her back out. There is many plot twists about this book, about different characters and stuff like that. I will not go into massive detail because this book has been out forever, but yeah, that's sort of the general gist of it anyway. I think when people talk about this book, they're sort of like reminiscing of when they read it as a kid. I never read this as a kid, but the Inkheart movie, which is a terrible movie by the way, I watched it back like a couple of weeks ago and it is an awful movie, but I was obsessed with it when I was a kid. It was like my favourite film when I was a child, and I sort of get the sort of same vibe with this book. I didn't read it when I was a kid and a lot of people started talking about it, or a lot of people on my For You page were talking about Inkheart. I don't know why, I don't know if it had like a little mini resurgence or people were just sort of like, books I read when I was a kid sort of thing. But I did want to get in on the action. Like I said, I enjoyed the film a lot when I was a kid. It was quite a staple in my childhood. So I thought, why not read the book? I don't know if I was not in the right mind place. I just got fired, which is why I was able to read it so quickly. And this just wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. The world building was very incredible. I think I gave this a 3 stars. The characters were just sort of not great. It didn't really give me everything. I thought it was a bit too long as well, and I know it was like a lot more detailed than the film because I just sort of based everything in this book off the film. There was a lot more detail, there was a lot more plot lines, but I think a couple of things just didn't really make sense. It did feel a bit too long, and overall I felt like when you're reading like such a big book, I think like investing so much time into it, like if I had read Priory of the Orange Tree and hated it, I would be seething with hatred for it because of how long it took to read that book. I will say I do have a little bit of nostalgia literally for this time last year because I was reading this, like I said, I just got sacked from my job and I was reading this on the train to my mum's, and I was going to take a break for a couple of days at my mum's, and I had a really amazing time there. And I feel like this book in itself sort of encompasses that like really bittersweet time I had there because of obviously what had just happened, but I got to have a really nice time over there, and this book sort of just reminds me of that. So it does hold like a little piece in my heart for being there for me in a time when I kind of needed it. Like I said, I enjoyed this book, it just didn't reach the hype, so I did give it 3 stars, and I'm really sorry for people that are going to be like, that's my favourite book of all time. I know, I'm so sorry. Some people on Goodreads were literally saying like, this is what a fantasy book should be. This is like this staple of the fantasy world. And when I read it, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like that was it. It was nice. Don't get me wrong, it was nice. It was nice, comforting little book. Would I read it again? No. It's a bit too long for me to invest that much time again. But I will say the cover on like the new reworked covers are some of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen, so I have to give props to that. I know there is another 2 books in the series, and in fact I was very invested in buying the other 2 books when I got this one, because I was like, I'm going to enjoy this so much. I love fantasy. Fantasy books are my favourite genre. And I just never bought the other 2 books, because after I finished this I was like, yeah, that's all I needed to know really. Like I said, I did enjoy it, but just not as much as I thought I was going to, because of how hyped up it was and listening to other people talk about it. I feel like it needed to be a staple in my childhood for me to really enjoy it, but there we are. Under the Whispering Door was one that I was really disappointed in. Under the Whispering Door follows a guy who has died, and he is currently in the midst of going into the afterlife. So he's in this sort of like waiting period, which is in a tea cafe, and the person he is living with is like the person who is meant to cross him over, but he ends up falling in love with him. It's a whole storyline, coming to terms with the fact he's dead, doing his redemption arc, ready to go into the light, and there's sort of a twist at the end that I hated. So, you know, I did hate the ending of this book. I didn't have any idea that TJ Klune was problematic when I bought this book. Do not buy any TJ Klune books anymore, please. He is a problematic author. He is not great, so do not buy any of his books. But I will say this, to give you a reason to not buy any of his book, this was garbage, mama. Under the Cerulean Sea, which is a problematic book by the way, has been held to such a high standard on Books Talk. I don't know why, but when anyone talks about a good book, that seemed to always come up, and so everyone was super excited for this book to come out. I was very excited. I literally pre-ordered this book. I hadn't read Under the Cerulean Sea, but I was like, oh, if he's a good author, his next book will be really good. This was so bad, and I was more disappointed than anything. I think this is also on like my worst books of the year list sort of thing, but I was so upset and so disappointed at this book, and I can't even resell it because I spilled juice on it, so all of my like pages are like dyed purple and have water stains all over them, so I can't even get rid of it because it's a signed edition. But if anybody just wants a stained book, I will send it to you for free. The plot was really predictable towards the end actually. The main character is a dickhead and is painted to be as such, and this is meant to be his redemption arc. It was 10 pages in and the main character is being really mean. He's a boss of a company, he earns lots of money. He's being really mean and then fires one of his employees for like a minor mistake. The second I started to hear this character speak and this storyline, I literally turned to my partner and was like, I hope this isn't the protagonist of the story because I'm not interested. And I should have DNF'd this book fully, and I think this is the year where I start DNFing things because I really just didn't like it at all. And it is his redemption arc and he becomes a better person, but he doesn't actually do any work on himself, and it's sort of like given to him and then sort of shoehorned in that it's a love story as well, and that he falls in love with somebody, and it just makes zero sense. I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the story, I didn't like the setting, and yeah, if you're gonna do a redemption arc for somebody, I don't want it to be some like rich white asshole. This was super disappointing. I gave it, I think like 1-2 stars maybe. And yeah, I don't want to talk too much about it because like I said, it is on like my worst books, but I think I'm more disappointed about it than anything. So the next book I want to talk about is Tender as the Flesh. It is in a world where the animal meat has turned bad and it's poisonous to eat, and so we start eating humans instead, but we start breeding them in like farms and sort of justifying why deemed to be meat, and that happens instead. So it does follow a cannibalism storyline. The main character works at one of these slaughterhouses where they slaughter people for meat, but it's like, oh yeah, I'm vegetarian, I'm different than the others, and then does something illegal, which is falling in love with a cattle or woman basically that is meant to be used for meat, but that is illegal, and then there's like a big super big twist at the end and it's shit. I remember sighing when the twist happened and just went. Of course, Tender as the Flesh is a very popular Book Talk horror book, and also I have left a review on it on my channel. I have no idea why I send the review. I make videos, I post them and I forget about them, but I know that I've made a review about this, and this I gave 3 stars, but again was so disappointing because of how hyped up it was. And when I read it, I didn't like the twist at the end. The plot felt a little bit predictable. I didn't like the main character. There were some really gory elements added, but not really any reason to why they were added. There are some animal abuse scenes that just feel so shoehorned in just to have that extra goriness, and for me it just didn't make sense with the story, it didn't make sense with the plot, and I really didn't enjoy it. It was not a good horror book. One of my favourite books of 2022, Tell Me Where I'm Worthless, was a horror book, and that made me genuinely scared to turn the page. And that had the effect of horror. It had goriness in it as well. When you see a really good horror book with tender as the flesh, it's just not good, alright? It's just not good. We need to leave it behind, and it's not a good horror book, alright? I gave it 3 stars because I thought the plot was very imaginative, but I do feel like the author didn't really go anywhere with it. The next book I want to talk about is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This was actually because I saw someone on TikTok, and I will put the TikTok here if I can find it. This book is not a sad book. It's not sad. It's not. And yet I feel the most insane, crippling sense of sadness in my chest that I don't think will ever go away. I saw someone on TikTok bawling their eyes out at this book, and immediately I said to myself, I need that book. You've sold me, I need that book. And then I read it. I did give it 4 stars, and this is one I enjoyed but just disappointed me because I thought I was going to react a lot better to this book, or at least a lot sadder. But when I finished this book I was like, yeah, that was a good book. It follows a coffee shop which, under the right conditions and like if you follow all these rules, you can go to the past or the future to talk to somebody, but the rules are you can't leave the seat. You only get basically 2 minutes with them. The person has to have been to the coffee shop before. There is a lot of elements to this that technically don't make it worth it. It's either 4 or 5 sets of people who do think it's worth it, and they decide and their stories and why they want to do it, and they are meant to be very heartbreaking, very sad stories, but I don't know if I'm just a bit too cold-hearted or it just didn't hit the right tones. But for me, I enjoyed them. It was very, very good writing and I did enjoy them, but it just didn't hit that emotional heartstring that I was wanting from the book. Sometimes you want a book and you want to cry, you're in one of those emotions where you feel in a bit of a void and you just know you want to cry. That's what I was hoping was going to come from that book when I was reading it, and I didn't, so that's the disappointing part from it. Oh, this one's going to piss people off. I know this one's going to piss people off as well. Delilah Green Doesn't Care was not a good book, and I kind of want to do my own review on it. This is a romance book and it's a spicy adult romance. I didn't like this book and it was really disappointing for me. I think I might do a review on this book actually, but here's the gist of why I am disappointed with it. This is Delilah, this is Claire. Claire is a single mum who lives in a town, and Delilah is from that town and has to go back to this town to do wedding photography. She's tried to leave. She doesn't really like her family that much. She doesn't really have family there. She's tried to cut ties with the town completely, but she promised she would be the photographer at her sister's wedding because she is a professional photographer. And so she goes back to the town to do the photography for that. Straight people are kind of insane because I think her sister has 2 weeks of wedding stuff, and Delilah has to be the photographer at the wedding brunch and she has to be the photographer at parties and stuff like that, and it's just 2 weeks of rehearsals and wedding dinners and breakfasts, and straight culture is insane. Because what the fuck? I understood why Delilah got fed up fucking fast. I used to be a wedding photographer, so it hits home, and the craziest thing I was asked to do was to go between 2 hotels to do the groom and the bride's dressing up, and I spent a lot of money on taxis, let's just put it that way, going to and from each hotel, and that was enough for me to go, this job is not for me actually. So I can understand brides bullshit sometimes, so yeah, I would have thrown the towel in a lot sooner than Delilah should have done. What disappointed me about this book is there is a spicy scene that a lot of people have praised for being like super spicy, and before the spicy scene starts, Delilah says that she runs her fingers over Claire's imperfections, meaning stretch marks, because Claire is a bigger character. And also, as a fat person, that was gross. No, like, do not call any stretch marks an imperfection. It's a gross remark, and that turned me off the entire scene. Like, I don't care if it was the spiciest scene ever written. That remark itself shut me off completely. I did not care about the spicy scene at all after that, because I was like, okay, Delilah Green, respect fat people 2023. The male characters in this book are meant to be written as bad people, I know that, but they are so one-dimensional, and they're so invested in like their bro culture. And don't get me wrong, that's how I view men anyway. Like, I don't think men really have anything other than, you know, showing off to other men, because that's a horrifically straight thing to do. The men in this were just so aggravating to read because of how one-dimensional they felt. They just felt like somebody was rambling about men, which is, you know, fair enough, but in the book I just felt like I needed a bit more from them, even just reasons to why they were acting that way, or even just like a confrontation between them all, or something else to sort of make the male characters in that a bit more bearable. I don't know, they just felt really one-dimensional. I just felt like they just needed a bit more to them than just being dickheads. And yeah, I just didn't enjoy that bit at all. And also, the miscommunication trope is one of my most hated tropes. As somebody who has really bad anxiety and has to over-explain themselves often and has to talk a lot to understand other people's point of views, I don't know why people just don't talk to each other. Because there's a miscommunication trope right at the end. I just don't enjoy that sort of trope, and it was such a disappointment because of how excited everybody was for this book, including me. I was super excited. I did pre-order this, and it just feels like a shame about this book. Okay, the last book I have to talk about is the Inverts. So the Inverts follow two very rich people in the 1920s. Both of them are gay, but they go into a lavender marriage. It's where two gay people go into a marriage to seem like a straight couple to the outside world. It was a very, very popular thing to do when obviously being gay was illegal. And so it follows their antics and these two people, and it is written like a book I've never read before. Like, I've never read something quite as, I don't know, the language was quite harsh. It was quite a shock to read. Marketed as this like dirty, inappropriate like book, and I had my eye on it for so long, and I was convinced, because every time I saw it I was like, I need that book, it sounds so good, and then I just never picked it up. It was one of those, and then I was just convinced. I was like, this is going to be the best book I've read, because I've seen it so many times, and in my brain I've gone, I need that book. I convinced myself it was gonna be great. I read it on one plane journey. I couldn't even go onto Goodreads to read other people's reviews. You gotta feel some sympathy for me. It wasn't great. It really wasn't great, and that was my own hyping up. I just didn't like the characters. The characters were super unlikable, and I guess it was meant to be like a caricature of like rich people and the privilege that they had in being in this time in this lavender marriage, because they could practically do whatever they wanted. And the end of it didn't really make sense to me either. Like, the ending, they both go into separate places because they're at war, the money sort of runs out. Like, there's a lot that goes on at the very end of the book that I didn't quite understand. It didn't really fit the tone of the rest of the book. But yeah, I was super disappointed just because of my own hypings up for that book. I didn't really like the language, I didn't like the writing, I didn't like the characters at all, and it just felt a bit too much for me. So yeah, if you are planning to read the Inverts, there are definitely better LGBTQ books to read. It's probably not one of them. I don't recommend it, but that is just my opinion, of course. I think with having TikTok and having people talk about a lot of books and basically hyping them up a lot, I think it's important to talk about. Sometimes you can be disappointed with those sorts of things. You don't have to like the books that everyone is sort of talking about. So the next video I will be coming back with is my Illumicrate video. Thank you so much for watching and I shall see you later. Bye!